Jesus is the ultimate secure connector. Jesus looked like an emotionally avoidant person. Did Jesus look like a pleaser? Did he look like a controller or a victim, an avoider? And the answer is no.
Hey guys, it's Mindy Linscomb, your host, and I'm back at the Something New show, and you will not believe who I have in the studio today. His name is Marc Cameron, a licensed marriage and family therapist, and last night I got to meet he and his wife Amy on an airplane ride as they were passing through Las Vegas. I was flying home from a work trip, and we got to talking about his latest book that is coming out December 2nd. It is called Understanding Your Attachment Style, and he is in Colorado Springs because he was being interviewed by Focus on the Family, and I said, Marc, this is way too good to just skip over and not talk to my audience about it as well. So while you're in Colorado Springs, I basically begged he and Amy to come over to our house today and join us in the studio to get deep into this really amazing topic, because I know it's going to help our working parents and people listening everywhere. So Marc, thanks for being so spontaneous.
Thrilled to be here. Yeah, I love spontaneity.
I know, it's awesome. Well, you are no stranger to radio. Every week you are hosting a live radio show. It's the largest Christian counseling call-in radio show in the country, and it's called
New Life Live.
New Life Live. And so
I'm a co-host on the show.
Oh, you're a co-host on the show. Well, today is going to be kind of similar because I need therapy. So I'll be your live guest on your show, even though you probably already did an episode this week. But I really I learned so much just in our short time together that I thought it would be good today. I came prepared with some questions so that we can all learn. And I want to be a student today about your topic here. Again, it's the path to overcoming unhelpful patterns and building healthy, secure relationships. So I am curious, for listeners who might be hearing this term attachment theory for the first time, what exactly is an attachment style and why does it matter in our everyday relationships?
So everybody has an attachment style. And so attachment research has been studied for the last 8 decades, 80 years now. Researchers have been studying the bond between a mother and a baby and how well attuned a mother is to a baby's needs and how responsive she is to that, and what security and trust the baby builds upon that. And so that's called an attachment style. An attachment style is a bonding style. We all have one. It's formed from the relationship with our parents growing up. It's formed continuous throughout all of our childhood. Of course, it starts in the baby years, just like a house is built, everything's built upon the foundation, so everything gets built on top of that. And that research shows that attachment style that we form with our parents, we actually take into adulthood with us. But there's only one secure attachment style. The rest are insecure attachment styles that basically are strategies that we form when our needs don't get met, to deal with them going unmet or to try and get them met. And in childhood, this is adaptive, but because we don't choose our parents, we don't choose our environment, we don't choose how we grow up. But in adulthood, we have more power, we have more responsibility, and that's when it becomes dysfunctional, because we use those same strategies that we learned, but they're problematic and they drive the core of conflict in a relationship.
Okay, well, I'm analyzing my parenting style right now. I'm thinking, oh God, I hope I'm not messing up my children with how I've raised them. But I'm really curious if you could walk us through the different types of attachment styles and tell us more about the one that is considered secure.
Right. Okay. So let's start with the avoider. So the avoider grows up in a home where there's not a lot of talk about emotions and feelings. And so this kid might fall over, hurt themselves, start to cry, and their parents are going to give this type of response. Come on, you're okay. To try and just get the kid to recover quickly, or there's no monsters under the bed. There's nothing to be scared of. Go to sleep. There's nothing to worry about. It's going to turn out fine. So whether it happens intentionally or unintentionally, this kid's emotions get dismissed. Now, this kid has a problem because they need to be close to their parents to get their physical needs met. But whenever they make these expressions, they're kind of kept at a distance. And so they learn to turn the volume down on their emotions. Now, usually in this home, what is valued is performance, task mastery, academics, athletics, getting stuff done, right? And so that's where they get their attaboys or their attagirls. And so they grow up going into adulthood being this performer type person. And in the business world, we love that. We love people who are efficient. We love people who are proficient. We love people who just can get over it and get on with it. And so their style is reinforced in the business world or in the work world. But when it comes to relationships, they're attractive to others because they're consistent. But when conflict occurs, they expect others to do what they do, just move on and get over it. Don't feel your emotions. And so they're more problem solvers. Let me just kind of fix the problem for you so that you stop emoting and then I don't have to deal with it.
Looking for the perfect vacation spot to disconnect from everything, put your feet in the softest sand, and enjoy a fresh, renovated 2-bedroom, 2.5-bath townhouse right on the beach in my favorite place in the world? Well, 30A is situated in the panhandle of Florida, and I'd love for you to check out Something Blue 30A on Instagram and make it the perfect place for your next vacation. That's avoidance.
That's the avoider attachment style.
Okay. What's the next one?
The next one is what we call the pleaser attachment style. So this is an anxious attachment style. So the pleaser grows up in a home where the opposite occurs. They learn to manage their parents' emotions. So they typically have a parent who is angry and that anger scares them, or they have a parent who's highly critical, or one who's a helicopter anxious parent or a chronically depressed parent. And so they become the good kid, because they want to regulate their parent, because when their parent gets stressed out, it causes anxiety in them. So they regulate their parent so that they can regulate themselves, and they grow up going to adulthood just doing that, regulating other people. So you'll ask this person, where do you want to go eat? And they'll say, I don't know, where do you want to go eat? Because they want you to be happy, because when you get stressed out, if other people get upset, they feel that anxiety on the inside. And so they're people pleasers. They give in, they have difficulty saying no, and they tend to become codependents.
And I can only imagine that in the same household, you might have different reactions by our children.
Yes,
even
yes, you can.
With the same set of parents. So like
Correct.
You could have a pleaser and an avoidance.
You could.
Okay.
Yes. It will depend on how the kid responds to the parent.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is how we're uniquely all wired to receive, right? Like there's some receptive data, I'm sure, that like same environment could impact this different people differently.
Right. I mean, somebody who's born earlier may have a lot more responsibility put on them to, take care of the rest of the siblings, but there's also temperament involved. Some people are introverts, some people are extroverts, right? This is kind of how we're wired intrinsically. You just come out the womb that way. You can't change being an introvert or an extrovert, but attachment is a how we are, not a who we are, and that's formed.
Wow.
And shaped.
And then how many more are there?
There's 3 more here,
Okay.
3 more insecure ones. So the next one is the Vacillator. That's another anxious attachment style. And so this kid grows up in a home where they get some connection and attention from a parent, but it's inconsistent. They're made to wait on it. So that could be because it's based off the parent's moods or based off the parent's physical availability. So that could be a divorce or a custody situation, or it could be the parent's job, a parent who travels frequently or works shift work. So this kid gets connection they enjoy, then they're made to wait. And in the waiting, they feel unseen, unknown, misunderstood. And so they are the protesters. They're going to sulk, they're going to pout, they're going to have an outburst to get the parent to see that they're upset and come after them. But they are resistant to comfort too. So they do a push-pull. And they grow up going to adulthood looking for that consistent connection they didn't get as a kid. And they are all in on the dating phase because it's all about all the things that they missed. Time, connection, attention, because their longing for connection gets turned on high. But then, relationships start with that idealization phase. But then when that wanes and conflict occurs, they do what they did as kids. They protest, they pout, they do the push-pull. They push other people away, even though they want the other person to come after them, and then they continue to push them away. And it becomes confusing.
Yeah, I can see that in adulthood, how that rolls over. Okay,
yeah.
What's that?
And then the last 2 form out of the same childhood home. It's called, in traditional research, it's called the disorganized attachment or chaotic attachment, and that's really kids who come from homes where there's abuse or neglect. So that could be physical, sexual, and so basically their environment is dangerous, and so needs are reduced to survival. And so these kids get out of their home as quick as they can, sometimes as early as 14, 15, 16. And so they go, they can form a mix of the attachment styles, which is why it's called disorganized attachment. But they can also go one or two ways too. Because they learn relationships are like this, a one up, one down. Somebody is in charge and the other body just has to take the abuse. The controller says, well, I'm not going to be in this position. I'm going to be in this position. And so they control their environment for predictability, and they control their environment by controlling other people. Or in the other, the victim learns there's nothing I can do to stop the abuse. It just will happen. So if I can just stay under the radar as much as possible, that will lessen the frequency of abuse. And so they learn to be helpless. And these two often find one another in adulthood, and they end up in the cycle of abuse.
Okay, and then can you talk about the healthy one?
Yeah, and so this is the good news of attachment research. So we all have an attachment style, right? That's undisputed. It's cross-cultural. But the good news is that if you didn't come out of childhood with a secure attachment style, you can actually earn one in adulthood. And so somebody who's securely attached, they grow up in a home where a parent picks up on their internal states and helps them put words to it. They pick up on their behaviors. A kid might come home from school and they might go to their room quietly, and a parent will then go and knock on the door, say, hey, are you okay? I noticed you were quiet today. Are you feeling sad? Did something happen at school? And then as that kid shares a story, they give them space, and then they will affirm them. And they'll empathize, they'll validate. It makes sense that you feel that way. I'm so sorry that happened. And that kid grows up with language for what's happening on the inside. And so when they go into adulthood, we do two things with our behaviors. We talk them out or we act them out. Or I like to say we verbalize or we dramatize. But if I dramatize, then other people got to guess what's going on inside of me. But if I have language to say, this is how I feel, and then to link that to a need, I feel sad, I need comfort, I feel unheard, I just need to be heard out, they more likely get their needs met, and they find other people who are like them. And so this is the relationship math. It takes two secure people to have a secure attachment style, right? You can't take two insecurely attached people, put them together, and expect the relationship's going to be secure. That doesn't make sense. So these folks find one another in adulthood. And they're not perfect people, because there's no perfect individual. And it's not that they don't have conflict, but they have less conflict and it's less intense. And they know how to talk through things. And when they don't get their needs met, they can self-soothe because they had all those experiences of being co-soothed by a parent.
Do you ever see a couple with a secure and an insecure attachment style, like one and one?
Well, so attachment's rated on a spectrum, meaning
Okay.
it's a continuum. You can be mildly, moderately, or very much like any one of these styles, okay?
Got
And
it.
so nobody is completely secure. We all come out of childhood with something. There's a lot of things that interrupt the cycle of bonding, premature kids, sick sibling. There's things that interrupt that cycle, and nobody is perfect. So our kids come out with some kind of wounds. And so all secure attachment is I'm more secure in my strategies than insecure. But if I'm 51% of the way somewhere, I've still got a long way to go, right? And so this growth is continuous. You can continually become more secure throughout your life.
Now I'm thinking to why my therapist made me get a feelings pillow. So I have a pillow in my office over here, and it's the wheel, and with all the words to put language around how you feel. And sometimes we get off track, but we try to throw it to our kids and say, hey, like, pick a word. How are you feeling here? And when we remember to do it, it is really rewarding, I think, to watch their transition from overwhelm to, okay, I can express how I'm feeling right now because I have words to it. So it was really interesting. Verbalize or dramatize. I'm going to explain that to my kids because I want them, and I want myself too, to be someone that can put more language to it instead of just maybe internalizing some of the weight.
And you feel better when you can tell someone, this is how I feel, and you see that they get it, they're nodding along, they empathize and they validate. Even if your problem is unsolved, you feel resolved on the inside just from that connection.
Well, and I'll just defer a little bit to the side if we could just like loop this over to even in a co-working space, not as a married couple, but as colleagues. And, I lead a team. I teach a lot of people how to lead teams. And I can just imagine that some of the response can be defensive when if it was just simply if people were able to articulate how they were feeling around the circumstance that they're frustrated, if that would potentially solve some conflict.
Yeah, if you have words for that, if somebody encourages that for you, and if they're safe for you to share that with, absolutely.
Yeah, safety. Okay. So you say in your book that most people think that the relationship problems are about the other person, but it's often their attachment style. What are some signs that someone's relationship tension is actually attachment driven?
So we all have triggers. And so what a trigger is a reminder in the present of something in the past. And often you'll hear people say, I'm feeling triggered right now. And what they mean by that is I'm getting mad and I'm about to blow. But people don't often stop long enough to consider, well, what exactly is being triggered in me? What is this reminding me of? And so that happens in relationships, in marriages. People will fight about the smallest thing will trigger something, like the food being cold or being made to wait for somebody to leave the house or whatever it is. And what it is it's triggering something from the childhood. So, waiting on somebody could be triggering some type of abandonment in someone, and they're not actually aware of that. But all of those feelings come flooding in to the present, and then they react in the way that they learned how to react before. And that's what a reaction is. There's a difference between a reaction and a response. A reaction is I'm acting back. It comes from the Latin word reactio, and you're just repeating something. Whereas if you're responding, you're considering this situation and what's the most adaptive thing to do. And so that's the reason why we call them first responders, not first reactors, right? But how many of us are first reactor when we show up in a relationship?
Yeah. Well, and I'm just thinking the awareness, just to have an awareness of what is happening to yourself right now. Okay, I am reacting in my childhood attachment style. So just being self-aware enough to be like, okay, maybe I should pause for a second, put some language around what I'm frustrated about instead of responding in one of those unhealthy manners that you were saying.
And that's why in therapy, a therapist is often talking with you about your childhood, right? Because what they're doing is they're building a narrative, because the two sides of our brains do different things in the different areas, right? And the right side of the brain is predominantly emotions, and the left side of the brain is predominantly language and emotion regulation and prioritization and organization. And so when you can put language to emotions, you're actually integrating your brain and taking the more whole brain approach to something. And so as you make sense of your childhood story, that's actually the good news of secure attachment. It's called earned secure attachment in adulthood, and you've got to develop a coherent narrative. So coherent is something makes sense, narrative is story. So by making sense of my childhood story, I can understand how I've come to be shaped in the way that I'm shaped, and I can understand my triggers. And once I can see that, it moves it from out of sight, from the subconscious into the conscious, and now I can do something about it.
So interesting, because people joke about, oh, they're going to ask me about my childhood, but when you understand why, it makes so much sense.
Right, exactly.
It's like, it's not really funny. It's actually, there's a method to that. Okay, so for a listener driving to work, juggling kids, or doing dishes, what are some practical symptoms or behaviors that can help them quickly recognize their attachment style?
Well, probably with all what I've explained about how the attachment styles form, you fall within one of those. Everybody does. So
oh yeah, I was like, that's me.
all right, so you're probably listening and hearing, and some people are probably thinking, well, I might be a mix of a couple, and that's true. That can happen too, because most of us grow up with two parents. So what I can get away with mom, I can't get away with a dad, or vice versa. So I learn to bond with them separately, and so I learn different strategies. But one parent is usually the primary parent, or the parent who I have the most significant interactions with, and so that's where I'll form the primary part of my attachment style from. And so in my book, Understanding Your Attachment Style, I break it down into three separate stages of the book. There's develop insight, which is all about what is attachment and how is it formed, and then become more aware, which is I'm describing the attachment styles and which attachment style am I, and then show up to practice. So it's not just good enough to have this coherent narrative developed, because knowledge is good, but we all know diet and exercise lead to physical health, But how many of us follow through with that? We all sign up at the beginning of the year to go to the gym, and by February, half of people have dropped out,
It's really
right?
sad.
And so
Yeah.
show up to practice are the growth goals that we all need to start to practice. Now, the growth goals are different for each of the attachment styles, because for somebody who's a vacillator, they have no problem confronting someone. I have no problem going to you and telling you why I'm hurt and why I'm upset. But a pleaser, they don't want to do that. They're afraid of your reaction. So they give in and they default and they accept more of the blame. And so the growth goal for a pleaser is going to be learning to lean in to conflict and tension, whereas a vacillator is their growth goal is going to be learning to pull out of anger and learning to express more vulnerable emotions. So all of the attachment styles, each of the attachment styles have specific growth goals. We're all trying to get to the same place, but we're coming from different places. And so we've got to lean the other way from, what we've learned to do insecurely.
Just out of curiosity, because we were talking about this beforehand with Amy, what is your most common combo that you see in your office?
The most common combo that shows up to couples therapy is an avoider and a vacillator. Now, these attachment styles, they're not gender specific. So male, female can be an avoider, can be a pleaser, can be a controller, can be a victim. I've seen people who are very well educated and they're victims in their attachment style. They're abused when they go home. They put up with abuse, and you wouldn't know it, because these people are highly qualified professionals. But the most common combo that comes to therapy is the vacillator avoider, because pleasers usually they're conflict avoidant, and so are avoiders. But vacillators they're the driver of improvement in a relationship. They want to confront it, because usually they're seeking the ideal. They don't realize that they're 50% of the problem. So generally they're bringing in their spouse saying, fix my spouse. But that's the most common combo that shows up.
But you're like, I know what to do from here. It's okay. We've seen it before. Right? It's not
Right.
Yeah, it's not a moment of like panic. It sounds like it's just, okay, this is where we begin. So do you counsel couples together, or is it more like I'm just curious the pattern when you're learning about them and their attachment style. Do you do one person at a time and then come back together, or how does it work usually?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of therapists do that. I don't do that. Now, I practice something called attachment core pattern therapy, which was developed by Mylene and Kay Yerkovich, who wrote the book How We Love, which is what my book is built from. Their book is more focused towards couples. My book's more focused towards individuals, and they actually invited my wife and I to take over for them at the How We Love organization. So I practice attachment core pattern therapy, and that type of therapy, we keep couples together. And the reason why we keep, unless of course there was some dangerous type of situation and
Right.
someone felt fearful to speak up because of some kind of repercussion that could occur. But we keep couples together because as I'm helping one person find out about their childhood, right, when the spouse hears what the original wound is, one, it depersonalizes it for them. It helps them make sense of their spouse's reaction, and they develop empathy for their spouse, right? And as we develop empathy and understanding for one another, that's where connection happens. And I actually teach spouses they're doing the work in therapy. I'm showing them how to ask thoughtful questions. I'm showing them how to slow down and be a listener. So they're actually doing the work. I'm teaching them, I'm showing them, because my whole goal is to equip them to learn how to do this. My goal as a therapist is to work myself out of a job day one.
Yeah. What are some of the questions that you say you could start with? Like if we're listening right now and somebody's just beginning this journey, what are some of the questions they could start with? I assume tell me about your childhood, or tell me how you responded to your parents when you were upset, or did you get to talk about your feelings when you were little? I don't know. I'm just assuming some of those are the questions, but
Yeah, those are great questions. But what I do in therapy is I use the couple's dynamic to expose this regulation and create an opportunity to practice regulation. And so I walk couples through something called the comfort circle, which was developed by Madeline and Kay, which is a listener speaker role. Because most couples, they just argue back and forth. I say they bat the perceived facts ball back and forth, and they're trying to get the other person to see how they see it and agree with them. Whereas the comfort circle, all we do with that is we take the same amount of time, and often less when you think about how people go away and they sulk, and you just split that time down the middle and you say, okay, one of you is going to be the speaker, the other one's going to be the listener, and the goal here is to understand the other person's perspective rather than agreement. And so you slow things down. And I start with this question. I don't recommend starting with this question for a couple by themselves unless you feel particularly brave. But it's, what is the thing that bothers me about you? And then we go into the feelings, right? And then we talk about what their reactivity pattern typically is and how it plays out. And then we ask a historical question. Did you ever experience these feelings as a child? And what was happening and how old were you? And I get people to pull up a memory. And you wouldn't believe how often, almost every time, people are self-aware, that they will start to realize, like, wow, I guess I'm feeling the same way to you as I did to my mom when she did this to me. And I've learned my reactions, because everything that we know, we've learned, right? And everything that we've learned, we've been taught. And so our first teachers on relationships are our parents from our families of origins. So how we learn how to manage emotions, how we learn how to react is a teaching. And we just repeat that.
That is particularly brave to say, what is the thing that bothers me about you?
It is, but we're doing it in a contained environment.
Correct.
And, you have observer bias, so people are more likely to contain themselves when someone's watching. You and we drive the speed limit when there's a cop on the side of the freeway, even though that's not how we naturally drive, right? But it helps people slow down enough. And as we get into the childhood, you'll see the conversation totally flips, and people are not thinking about the thing that irritates me about you anymore. They're going into these memories, and we're building this narrative.
Wow. Okay. How do attachment styles influence couples' communication under stress? So I'm thinking, we're talking about like how they respond to problems and things, but just in general, does it influence their overall style for communication?
Yeah, I mean, avoiders have learned growing up that no one's available. I have to do things on my own. And so they become independent very early. So they don't share when they're going through hard things. And, they're more likely to want to work on projects by themselves, because I know I'm going to get it done. I know I'm going to get it done right. And if I rely on someone else, they might not do it in the right way. It might take longer. So they push past their emotions when they become stressed too, and they just deal with things by themselves. Pleasers become codependent. They're unsure of themselves. They want to find out, like, is this the right way? Am I doing it right? They need a lot of reassurance. And vacillators, they want the ideal. They want people to respond in certain ways. They want it to be genuine. They want it to be natural. They just want it to flow. And if people struggle, then they push back. They do this push-pull. And so it definitely influences how we react to stress. And a lot of times that's how you can see someone's attachment style come out.
Mm-hmm. Is there something, like, I'm just thinking in the parenting dynamic, is there something we can do regularly to just, try to aim for the more secure, healthy route? I heard some earlier tips when you were saying, talk about your feelings, check in, notice a change in behavior, pause and make time to talk. Like, I'm just wanting you to maybe expound on that, as we're parenting people and possibly just not even realizing it, unintentionally pushing kids away or unintentionally moving over something and teaching them an unhealthy way to attach. So I'm curious if you could give us some proactive things we could do to create healthy attachment styles in our home.
Yeah, all of those things that you said are great. And most people know what healthy, secure communication tools are. They just struggle to do it because they get triggered. So you have to learn how to work on your own attachment style if you want to pass that on. The research shows that you can't pass on secure attachment to your kids if you don't yourself have a secure attachment, right? You've heard this phrase before: more is caught than taught. So kids are watching. So all of those things that you said are great. Creating time, asking about feelings, drawing a kid out, making observations about what they're feeling. But you have to have a language for emotions yourself, right? And as you learn to say, hey, I'm feeling stressed right now, I'm feeling overwhelmed, I'm feeling fearful, I just need a minute right now, it's not about you guys. As they see the way that you communicate what's going on in your internal self, as they see the ways that you manage stress, that's the primary way kids learn. So, and as you become capable to do that, you're more capable to do the other things.
Mm-hmm. What are some of the most common things that you get called up about in that radio show, like when you're on New Life Live? What are some of the really, oh, this is pretty popular question?
Oh, New Life Live is just a whole host of things. People call in with spouses cheating on them. People call in with their own pornography problems. People call in with estrangement from adult kids. A whole host of things people
So
call
it's
in.
not necessarily specific to this, but do you ever refer back to some of this
Yeah,
theory?
absolutely. I'm an attachment-based therapist, so
So it's going to go back to that.
right. I mean, attachment is a proven thing. We all have an attachment style. That's proven. The way, neuroscience, the way that we're designed, the way that babies grow, like this is all proven the way we get shaped. And so all problems somewhere are rooted in attachment. Okay, so that's the lens that I look at things through. Like addictions are just a way for somebody to manage emotions that they don't, it's a way for them to numb, a way for them to distract. And so, yeah, I mean, most recovery programs focus on sobriety. Okay, but what's the why behind that? And so, if we don't understand the root cause, then we will just fill that with something else. Even if we fill it with something else that we think is, healthier. Well, I'll just spend more time at work, or I'll just go to the gym more, and that's how I get
Yeah,
my
I was going to
stress
say,
out. That seems healthy, but it's not necessarily
it's still an
developing emotional
obsession. Yeah.
intelligence, right?
Yeah, no, I have seen a lot of people that are coming out of alcoholism switch to exercise with their addiction, but then that becomes obsessive too when the emotions are still being suppressed.
Correct. Well, people would switch to a different addiction. They'll switch to eating or something else. But these are all the ways that we manage our emotions in non-relational ways. When we know how to bring stress, I'm going to say, into a relationship, and not in a conflictual way, but if I can share stress in a relationship in a constructive way, and you can be a reliever and a soother of stress to me, I feel better after that. I feel connected. I feel bonded to you. And we know this drives our sexual connection with one another too. Females, their sex drives are primarily based on the emotional and the relational connection, whereas male sex drives are based off of a constant hormone, testosterone. And so they can have sex with their wife even if they don't feel emotionally connected with them. Whereas females, women, generally need to feel relationally connected in order for that to drive their desire. So all things at some point come back to attachment.
Wow. Um, there some basic things that you and your wife do on a weekly basis to stay connected? Are you in a rhythm of checking in, or is it more just as needed and you can read each other so well now? I'm curious to just some very practical ways that you can be in a routine of making sure that you're doing okay, you and your spouse.
Yeah, I like to say good relationships happen on purpose, not by accident. Nobody ever fell into a good relationship by accident. You don't find a good relationship. Most people are out there, and I reference this in the book. They're online, or they're trying to find someone who is compatible for them, and they define compatibility as like, do we like the same things? We're both outdoors people, so we're
Yeah.
compatible. But
Trust me, I'm in the wedding industry. I hear it all the
right.
time.
But compatibility is two things to be able to coexist in harmony. It doesn't mean that you can't have differences. Everybody has differences, and it's able. How do we appreciate? How do we learn how to negotiate, take turns? How do we show up well? How do we regulate ourselves? How do we initiate repairs? Those are the qualities of secure attachment. So you have to, one, be able to work on yourself intentionally, and that's where the growth goals come in. But yeah, you have to also be able to show up for your spouse and talk about, how was your day, more than just like it was fine and tell me about the facts. Well, how did you feel when that happened? Or even talking about emotional uh, childhood injuries that we all have. We none of us escape childhood without something that happened to us, even if it was, again, like you were in a car accident and it wasn't your parents' fault, but they were taken away or you were injured. Something has happened to all of us that has impacted us, and the more we have somebody who is willing to learn that about us, the more we feel seen, known, and understood. And so a lot of the times, the prescription is, well, just make time and go on dates. And dates are good, but it's quality versus quantity of the connection.
That's comforting because, Jordan and I have a busy life in this season with very active kids, ages 8 to 15, four of them. And so dates aren't really consistent, but having a conversation in the closet at 10 p.m., looking at each other in the eyes and saying, hey, how are you feeling right now? That's something we try to fight for, to make sure that we, connect and understand, like, if nobody else has seen us like that, we've seen each other. Like, we know where we're at and we feel dialed in. But I've never dove deep into this work. And so I'm really excited to do that and talk to our listeners about the self-assessment here in a little bit. But curious if you could tell us some, let's see here, we center around, leading with faith and intention on this show. It's one of the few places I talk about my faith. And I would love to understand, how does your faith kind of intersect with all of this?
Yeah, this is a really good question. And Amy and I were Christians ourselves. And, we don't hide the fact that we have a Christian worldview. And so attachment, it starts from parent to child, correct? And then it goes from spouse to spouse. And then it goes from you being a parent to you being a child. But our attachment also goes this way with God. And so, people who are avoiders, they're more they more are performance driven when it comes to their view of God. Like, I'll work my way into heaven, even if they're not consciously thinking they're going to work their way into heaven. They're more concerned about doing things and doing it right. And of course, the evidence of transformation in our lives is changed behavior, but we also need to recognize we're saved by grace too. So those two things go together. Somebody who is a pleaser, they tend to see God as being more of a judging God or more of a loving God, and everything is okay. They're going to excuse everything. So they tend to go one of those two ways, and they can maybe say a lot of fearful prayers and a lot of apologies to God because they feel like they're messing up. And somebody who's a vacillator can tend to more see God as idealistic. And God is he is the perfect person, sure. But they tend to dive into idealistic causes at church and things like that. But then when things don't go their way, they can feel deeply disappointed and then just like, this is not the church for me. I'm cutting that church off and I'm moving on to somewhere else. And, I'm talking primarily about avoiders, vacillators, pleasers, because those are the most common attachment styles. But yeah, controllers and victims.
It does change it a little bit in having a Christian worldview because, like you said, there's the grace element that isn't there if you don't have that, like the gospel message of, we are saved by grace. So we have absolute ability to overcome our, origin story and to renew our, like you said, our attachment style, but also our patterns can be redemptive, which is such a hope. It's the hope that we have.
Yeah, both those two things go together. Grace and change behavior go together. Jesus says, if you love me, you will obey my commands. And so we love him. We will, here's what I like to share, especially among the church, is that sanctification is a process. It's not an event, right? When we become a Christian, yeah, we're saved by grace, but we're not all of a sudden holy. Yeah, the slate is wiped clean until the next thought that we have or the next interaction that we have, right? But sanctification happens across a period of time where, the more we practice being like Jesus, the more we become like Jesus. Jesus is the ultimate secure connector. He was somebody who was in touch with his emotions and he could share that. He cried with Mary and Martha when Lazarus died. He was not afraid to say no and stand up, even harshly at times, against the Pharisees, and he wasn't emotionally avoidant. It wasn't just all about works. Yeah, he performed miracles, but then he also said, well, go and sin no more, but you're forgiven right now. He showed a lot of love. And so the workshops that we do, How We Love, because that's where Amy and I go and do our speaking through, and we go and we speak at churches, we ask that question, did Jesus look like an emotionally avoidant person? Did Jesus look like a pleaser? Did he look like a controller or a victim, an avoider? And the answer, people know, is no.
Wow, that's so good. Okay, I'm thinking, this is my last little question before we talk about the assessment. I'm thinking about how you have adult children and they might be in the season of life where they are open to finding a spouse. And I'm going to be there eventually. And I'm curious to you, how do you talk to your kids about choosing a spouse without over analyzing every single person that they're dating, but also being like, hey, like this is like you said, some people are like, oh, we both like hiking. And I just want to be a good parent when it comes to a sounding board for them when they're asking advice on, hey, what do you think about this? And thankfully, I'm not there yet, but I'm trying to prepare myself. And you might already be there with your children, but I'm curious too if there's, I know they probably understand attachment theory based on your work and being their dad, but can you talk to me about what would you say to someone that is considering a spouse or dating someone in a relationship and without being kind of weird and be like, okay, well, I think you might be not the right attachment style for me. Like I would be curious, is there a way to say like we can communicate well enough that this is probably going to work? This is going to work out okay.
Yeah, I think the most important thing to look for in a spouse is somebody who's willing to grow. And we also say this in our parenting conferences, our workshops too. We say there's no perfect parent, but you can be a growing parent. Okay, so somebody who's willing to grow, and growth that happens intentionally. Right? So you have to be able to identify the design. Attachment is our design of, it's our relational design. It's our bonding style. So if you can understand and have awareness of what your bonding style is, and you're actively growing, making efforts to grow out of it, then that's a person who you can consider. I would say, can I spend my life with this person? Of course, there's a baseline to everything, because you don't want to get into a relationship with someone who says, well, I want to grow and I'm making some efforts, but I'm an alcoholic, or, sometimes I can hit and I can hurt people. There's a baseline to this stuff, but nobody is perfect. And recognizing that, that infatuation stage at the beginning of a relationship, we see people through this idealistic lens. That happens to everybody, but then that wears off and realism sets in. And so it's how somebody reacts under stress. That's the key. How somebody is aware of their own emotions, aware of your emotions. How well can they stay engaged in that? Can they speak in a way that encourages somebody to listen? Can they listen in a way that encourages somebody to speak? Can they empathize? Can they validate? These are the skills of somebody who's securely attached. And again, it doesn't mean that you're perfect and you do it more. It just means that you do this more often than not, and you see the areas that you fail in, and you have a commitment, you have a plan of how you're going to grow. Growth doesn't happen by accident. And the other part is this person knows how to repair. When they mess up, they can go to you, they can own it, they can acknowledge it, they can say, I'm sorry, and they can hear you out and hear how you've been hurt. And that's another chapter in the book that I have. I have a chapter on forgiveness and repair, on what does that look like? What does a good apology look like? And why should we forgive?
That sounds like a really important chapter.
Yeah, it is.
I'm like, wow, forgiveness and repair.
Well, because whenever you have relational rupture, you have to have repair. Because if you don't have repair, if you just kind of move on, all of that hurt gets stored for the next event. And the next event is compounded by all of that hurt, even if you're not realizing that. And eventually that leads to bitterness and resentment and detachment.
Do you see couples staying married but totally detached?
Sure. There are people who are listening to this right now, and they know that they're roommates right now. They're detached because they're just so frustrated at their spouse, or they're so hurt by their spouse that they don't want to get a divorce, or it's convenient for them just to live a separate lifestyle from each other. But that's really sad, because this research shows that you can heal and you can grow, and even if your spouse doesn't want to grow, you can grow. And when you grow, you give your spouse different responses to deal with. So you might say to someone, hey, I can see this is important to you, but I'm not willing to argue or be yelled at. I'm going to take 20 minutes and I want to come back and I want to try and see if we can have a productive conversation about this. That's a lot different than arguing back with your spouse, right? It gives them something different to work with. And then they start to see, who's the reactive person in this relationship.
Interesting. It's encouraging, though. It's
It is.
encouraging because it's that, again, shows that there's a way out and that it is possible to change. And even if both parties aren't interested in changing, like you said, there's a lot one person can do.
You can change, you can grow. And what happens too is as you grow, you reduce your triggers. You're not as upset by what they're doing. You're not as reactive to them. And you also learn how to set boundaries in healthy and appropriate ways. And boundaries are not just, I'm not going to put up with this anymore. A lot of people think, I'm setting a boundary with you. Like, you will not do this to me. I like to say a boundary is a wall with a door in it, right? Where it says like, okay, this is not okay, but this is the way that we can have connection. And so there's a way back into relationship. That's an appropriate, healthy boundary.
So good. So good. Okay, so if I heard it right, it sounds like there's a really amazing self-assessment that for free people can have access to take online, and there's thousands of people every month taking this test.
Yeah, we have thousands of people who come to our website and take the free, we call it Love Style Quiz. And that was because when Mylan and Kay wrote their book, How We Love, in 2006, there wasn't a lot of books on attachment back then. People didn't really know about it. So their publisher said, how about we call this a love style, not an attachment style? More people will probably search the book. And
But
so
it
they called
is
them love style.
essentially is your attachment.
It's an attachment style. So even though it's called the Love Style Quiz, it's about your attachment. And we're actually in the process, the final stages of having it statistically validated. So it proves what it proves. And so
That's
we have
amazing.
thousands of people who take this quiz every month.
And where can they find that?
howwelove.com.
Okay, amazing. And can you tell us a little bit more about some of the other things you mentioned that you guys do, like workshops and speaking and counseling? I'm sure there's lots of things, but could you tell us what you and Amy are up to?
Yeah, so we have products on howwelove.com. We have webinars, we have recordings, we have audios on there. For couples and individuals, we have those same things for parents because attachment is parenting. And then we also have training for therapists and resources for churches. We have many churches across the country that do the How We Love church study. And it's a 9-week study, that video teachings, but that you have a leader and your leader guides you through the discussion in the group setting, but you watch the videos and the videos do the teaching. And so those are the things we have online. And then we go and we do speaking events around the country too, at different churches on parenting, on the couples dynamic, and even on sex.
I love that. And then this book, which I am so lucky to hold before it's officially released.
Right.
I'm like, how did I get so lucky to have a copy beforehand? But December 2nd.
Yes.
And I'm sure people can pre-order this.
They can pre-order it right now. You can pre-order it at all the major booksellers. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, Target, Walmart. I'm forgetting others here. And we actually have pre-order incentives right now. So if you pre-order it beforehand, there's some additional goodies that you will get too.
So again, this is called Understanding Your Attachment Style by Marc Cameron. And Marc, where can we find you online if we just want to kind of go down the rabbit hole on social media?
Yeah, so social media, Facebook, How We Love Book. It's called the same thing on Instagram. It's How We Love Book. I can't remember what it's called, the tag on TikTok, because we have a social media team that does that. But we're also on, we also have a YouTube channel. Howwelove.com is the website where you can find all of these resources. If you want to look up New Life Live, you can see hundreds of episodes of me being on the show and other people being on the show, giving good, sage Christian advice on there for people who are struggling.
Well, I love that. Well, we'll put it all in the show notes. And I am so glad that you fit us in today because this is such an important conversation. Thank you for sharing with
and
us.
understandingyourattachmentstyle.com, that will bring you to the book's website and you can see a little bit more about the book and about me on there too. But
Well,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, it was a
That's
blast.
so great. That serendipitous meeting we had. Now we're going to be friends.
I love it. For sure. And I'm so glad that Amy and Jordan are talking out there. It's so great. So thank you for coming, and to be continued.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe to the show, rate, review, and share with a friend. Also, follow The Something New Show on Instagram and Facebook. If you want a fuller experience, watch the show on YouTube to help you create a life worth celebrating.